Welcome, everyone. This is Milka Millians. I am here with you with CARE, Coaching Against Racism and Exclusion. If you are on the feed, if you've already joined us, please introduce yourself and let us know what city you are joining us from. I'm going to give everyone a few minutes to join the feed and then we'll get started. But share your name and where you are actually calling from, where you are joining us from on YouTube. Okay, I see there are a few people who are here. So let us know where you're calling from. And then if you could answer some of the questions that we have in the comment section, in the live comments, if you are a coach or if you are a professional, let us know what role you play in your organization, or you are an entrepreneur or a coach. Let us know what your situation is. All right, so as some of you put your answers down, I'm just going to get started. So as you know, this is Coaching Against Racism and Exclusion, and our speaker series is called Your Voice Matters, and we have had a number of great speakers come on during the last few weeks, and they've shared different topics around coaching. And today we are looking at something that I have found to be very useful, having a better grasp of toxic work culture. So our topic for today is we are looking at, is your workplace toxic? And also we will look at it from the vantage point of, as a coach, if you're working with individuals, if you have clients who are in toxic work cultures, as well as if you are somebody who is in an organization and perhaps you are dealing with a toxic work culture, or maybe you have friends or you have peers who come to you often and with the same stories over and over again about what their manager did or what their colleague did to them, and perhaps it's a toxic culture, but they really haven't defined it and they don't really understand what it means to be in a toxic environment, and how do you actually navigate these types of places. Sharon, welcome. I see Sharon is here. She's an executive coach, and she is here with us from Philly. You're very welcome to join us, Sharon, and thank you for joining this conversation. So we're going to get started. So doing a little bit of research before this live, and I found that the Society for Human Resource Management says that toxic office cultures cost organizations $223 billion a year. That's $250 billion that it costs them to deal with the toxicity in their organization. So that looks like litigation. It looks like a lot of lawsuits, as well as high turnover, having to hire new people, retrain them. So the overall cost to an organization, to toxic work cultures in the United States alone, is about $250,000. And this actually went up by 24% from 2008 to 2012. So this shows you how much many of us are in toxic environments, and we don't always know how to name it or that it is a toxic environment, but we're going to talk a little bit about what that looks like today, all the way from the highest level of the organization, leadership, down to the interactions that you're having on a day-to-day level with your peers. So first of all, Stanford Business Review came out with an article last year. And in that article, they were focused on toxic work culture, but from the perspective of the leadership. So the people who are in the executive team who are leading the organization, down one or two levels down in a large global organization. And what they found was that there are three traits that are associated with people who are considered narcissistic and who, as leaders, may have narcissistic traits. And those traits that they discovered were the most pressing for these leaders was self-centeredness, arrogance, and a lack of empathy. So those were the three things that they found, that that leaders who had very high narcissistic traits, those were the characteristics that they actually exhibited on a regular basis. And furthermore, what they found was that those leaders did not value collaboration and integrity at all in their organizations. So these were organizations where people were hyper competitive, and not the good kind of competition, but the type of competition that was toxic, that was hurtful, and also they didn't value collaboration. And so what that also meant was these are organizations where integrity didn't matter. So very often these were companies where they were always getting in trouble with the law. Things were happening in the company. They were breaking the law and violating legal standards in their organization. And so these are types of behaviors that you would find from toxic organizations. So I have a few questions for some of you. In the chat section, say yes if you've ever worked in a toxic environment, or know someone who has, or no. And also what your experience has been in dealing with toxic organizations. And you can give that from the perspective as a coach if you also work with people who are telling you they're in toxic organizations, or also if you are at one point in your career, you found yourself in a toxic environment. Because very often these toxic situations, when you are in an organization where there's a lot of toxicity, you may think, okay, something is wrong here. I'm not sure what it is, not sure what the characteristics are, but you do see certain patterns that repeat themselves over and over and over again. So another thing to keep in mind from a leadership perspective is that when they looked at leaders who perpetuate toxic cultures in their organization, one of the things they found was that roughly 4 to 12% of CEOs exhibit psychopathic traits, which means that they are on the narcissistic, they are leaders who have psychopathic behaviors. And so if essentially 1% of the world's population exhibits those traits, and about 15% of the prison population exhibit the traits of narcissism and psychopathic behavior. And that comes to show you that there is, you can see that there is a relationship where you see that there is a correlation where you see that 15% of the prison population, 15% of the people in the prison population has those traits, as do close to 12% of leaders. Regina says, yes, I have. I had a toxic boss who was a narcissist and a bully. Yes, I actually have as well. And this topic is near and dear to my heart because when I look back at my own professional experience, I realized that my first manager, my first full-time job, she exhibited narcissism. She was a narcissist. I don't know that she was clinically diagnosed, but from when I look back, I see that she had those traits, as well as my last job as well, before I actually left and started my own business. Very similar behaviors. They had the qualities of narcissists. And I found myself many times in my career in toxic environments. And I realized a big part of that were the types of professions that I was drawn to. Often they were white collar professions, whether it's management consulting, investment banking, so financial services, the legal profession, high ticket law firms. These are all institutions where you will find a tremendous amount of people who work in these organizations have narcissistic profiles. And this goes from leadership down to different multiple levels in the organization. So, so this is something that I'm very passionate about it because it's had a direct effect on me professionally over the years. And I've seen many other people that's also been impacted. And the more I've delved and done some research around it, I realized that there are certain patterns or certain things you can actually look for to better arm yourself. Whether you are looking for a new job, how do you better assess if this is an organization that has a toxic culture? You can actually find that out pretty early on, even in your interview process. If this is a toxic organization, or if you do find that your boss or you have peers that exhibit certain traits, whether it's narcissistic traits or they have, or they're in the cluster B types of, psychopath, cluster B behavioral traits, which are psychopath, sociopath, narcissistic people. You can actually have a quicker way of identifying them. And then how do you deal with these types of people once you're working in these organizations? All right, so here are some things I'm going to just share a list of certain things to keep in mind, certain patterns that you will see in toxic environments. So one of the first things that you will see very quickly in an organization is there's poor communication at all levels. I mean, there's a lack of transparency. Information is used as power. And so you find that people are just not good at communicating. And this is across the board in the organization. So you're missing deadlines, you're always stamping out fires because the communication across the board is just very poor. A second thing that we often see in toxic workplaces is that there's a lot of gossiping. It's a gossipy culture, a lot of backstabbing behavior, cliquey, backbiting. People are just saying horrible things about each other in silence, and you're aware of it. But you find that the culture is one where gossiping is pervasive, and people engage in this type of behavior, and they don't really think anything is wrong with that. Also, favoritism. You'll find in organizations that are toxic, there's a lot of favoritism going on. So unearned privilege, so people are getting, for some people, they have exceptions given to them and others are not. And this is something, especially if you are a minority, if you are a person of color or somebody who, you're not part, you may not have access to certain types of people. This favoritism one can be very tough because it's no matter how hard you work, you realize that because you are not favored, you're not given special privileges, that your hard work can easily get ignored. And a few other things to also keep in mind. So maybe this might seem a bit minor, but excessive micromanagement. If it's a culture of micromanagement, often it means there's a lack of trust, that people are just not trust. They just don't have enough trust in each other to get the work done. And so there's a lot of micromanagement. It's also excessive, that you might find also microaggressions. And so that is, little comments that are being made about you, whether it's about your race, your ethnicity, your identity, your hair, underhanded compliments that may come off as if they are, it may come off as if it's an actual compliment, but it's really underhanded, and it's like little small digs, like somebody asking you about your accent or where you come from, and they're doing it in such a way to diminish you after you actually share where it is you do come from, and so you will find those types of both microaggressive as well as aggressive behaviors in toxic environments. You will also find that these are places where there is often very little to no follow-up on disciplinary problems. So when somebody does something wrong, if it's a manager that's a favored manager, very often they can get away with a lot, and you can find these companies where they've had a number of lawsuits. They're always giving out, there's almost like a pool of money out there for payouts for misbehavior of managers, but not much is being done. Women are being blamed. For example, with the Me Too movement, there was most of these organizations when it came out, all of these infractions were happening. Those were very toxic places, and very often for years these behaviors were going on, but there was always but leaders and managers are pretty much protected, while others who are at the receiving end of these misbehaviors and the assault and that toxicity pretty much were often being blamed for these things. These are often fear-based These are often cultures where motivation is fear-based. So, the motivation does not come from a place of abundance or a place of, we're striving for something better. It's fear is used actually to get you to do your job. Also, you would find in these organizations, people overstep boundaries. Boundaries are completely disregarded. I remember there was a company I worked for, I can't name it, but I had a manager, he crossed boundaries all the time with people all the time. And it was things that are completely inappropriate, language, things that were said, gossiping about other people, just overall a level of professionalism at an institution like that was where you would expect it to be high. It was pretty poor. It was pretty bad because there was a lot of transgression when it came to boundaries. And as a more junior person, you would often find yourself, you had very little recourse because that person had so much power in that organization that there wasn't that much you could actually do. And again, Other tactics that you will find in these types of organizations is future faking. Now, future faking is basically when you are told that these great things are going to happen in the future, like, oh, you'll get a promotion if you keep doing this, you know, you're on the right path, but you notice year after year, you never get that promotion. But then they never deliver on their promise. There's always some sort of misdirection that comes your way when you do try to hold them accountable, especially during when you're going through your performance reviews. But then they always make it seem like next time it will be better. Now, the issue with future faking very often is that it can make you feel defeated. You know, no matter how hard you work, no matter how hard you try, there's a sense that, you know, that carrot that's in front of you, you never get to it, you never get it, and yet you keep on making sacrifices, and you keep on sacrificing your energy, your time, you're working weekends, you're working at night, your family's being impacted, but then it gets harder and harder to walk away because you keep on thinking, okay, if I just do this one more thing, if I try one more time, I'm going to actually impress them, and we're going to get to that place where we're much more effective. So these are just a few examples. And the biggest sign out of everything I just shared here, where there's a strong indicator that it's a toxic culture, is absenteeism. If people are calling sick all the time, generally something is, because the culture is so toxic, people need just time away, and vacationing is not enough. So people are actually calling in sick because they are getting sick, because the environment is so bad for their health. So that is often the biggest indicator of a toxic culture, is that people are just calling in sick. And if you can track that information, if you're in HR, you're in a role where you see that some departments, they have a higher rate of people calling out sick than others, that actually could be a good indicator of, you may want to explore what is it that's actually causing this level of absenteeism. If, for example, it's not, you know, a pandemic, or people are sick from just the flu, or some other thing that's actually going on right now. All right, so I see a few interesting comments and observations from some of you here, where Lysandra said, well, Sharon says, the main problem is when the toxicity comes from senior leadership. Yeah, very often, as I shared, when you have leaders who have strong narcissistic traits, or they're on cluster B, they have cluster B traits, so psychopathic, sociopathic behaviors, it starts at that level. And it just gets reinforced every level down the organization. So you'll often find organizations where, in the midst of the culture that you see, there is a lot of toxicity. Very often, the leader is part of that. It's rare that you'll find that they're divorced. Those two things are divorced. They usually go hand in hand. So they're very correct, Sharon. And Sandra says, yes, in my opinion, a yes culture seems to be created as a means of survival. Exactly, you're afraid. It's fear, you're afraid to speak up, you're afraid to make any mistakes. And these are also not, so these are cultures where, you know, people churn, the turnover is very high, because very often it's not sustainable. It's physically just hard to maintain what's expected of you, because you're not at ease when you're in the organization. And I see some other comments. I have observed fear in expressing diverse opinions, lack of demonstrated effective decision-making abilities, lack of demonstrated accountability. Yes, us versus them. That's very often prevalent in these types of cultures. Yeah, that's right, Milka. I certainly, you know, these types of experiences can certainly push you or to think differently about your work and how you decide to work. Yep, future faking, wow, so real, yet never heard that phrase. Yeah, future faking is real. It's always holding that carrot. You thinking, okay, things are gonna get better. And the more you sacrifice, the more you hope, but the more you can feel defeated or deflated, because you realize that you're actually never gonna get there. Yep, mental health days are real. So how can you gauge all this before joining an organization? Yes, Sharon, that's a great point. So my perspective on that are the questions that, first of all, the questions that you can ask during your interview, questions around, for example, how does this organization deal with changes? How do people, you know, when there are communication breakdowns, how are they resolved? So questions that you can ask that get you to learn more about human dynamics in the organization, how decisions are made. You know, you can ask, if you're talking to your manager, if a tough decision is being made, what's the process? How do you get others involved in that decision-making process? These are the types of questions when you go into an interview, if you're coaching somebody, getting them to step back, first of all. And I always tell people when I'm working with them, you know, you're interviewing the company as well. It's not just you. You do not approach it from a place of fear that they only have something to give you, but you bring a lot to the table, and this company is very, should be honored to have you. So you approach from a perspective of being able to ask questions that get you to better understand the culture of the organization. So questions around leadership, you know, for example, you can ask about, you know, the CEO, do they are they approachable? Like, are they do they walk around the office? Do people have opportunities to connect with leadership in the organization? If you are somebody who's entry level versus mid level or a senior level person, how accessible are people in the organization at different levels? So those start to give you an idea of, that goes beyond just hierarchy, but just, you know, how people engage each other, how people come together. And also the level of respect that there is for different types of people in the organization, depending on whether it's your ethnic or racial background, as well as the job level that you're in. And very often companies give themselves away. You can often tell when you know, if you're very observant, whether it's the website or when you visit, when you go for your interview, just be very present in your body and observe the culture, observe what you see. You know, there are some organizations, you go into them, like law firms, foundations, consulting firms, they're very much about power. So from the furniture they have, the types of paintings that are on the wall, you get a sense of what is this organization about? Like, what is it exuding to the world? And so what is it communicating just through the environment? And so very often we can ignore these things because we're so desperate, we want the job. But if I'm honest with myself, I look back at a lot of these organizations, these are institutions that are very much about power, very austere, and very much about hierarchy. And that was a big part of of how they communicated who they are and what they're about, versus other places where you get a sense of that there's more warmth, there's more flexibility, there's more openness. And so being mindful of these things can quickly help you to at least assess on a very sensory-based level what type of environment that you're in. Sharon, I hope that helped to answer your question. So let's continue. I have a few other thoughts, and essentially, I'd like for us to think about it in two ways. So first, from a coaching perspective, if you are coaching someone who comes to you and they're telling you, you know, I think my boss is a narcissist, or they exhibit very strong toxic traits, and I don't really know what to do. So one of the first things I would ask you to do as a coach is to think about, on the one hand, if this is somebody who has a team or they manage people, and they feel that there is toxicity in their own team or environment, something that has they have found with some research that has been done is that gossiping is often one of the biggest indicators of toxic behavior amongst teams and organizations. So quickly asking that person if they can actually, with their own team, if they can actually come to make some sort of a commitment, an agreement among each other to stop gossiping. And there's actually data out there that demonstrates that just that, limiting gossiping in your own team, in your own function, will actually reduce the level of absenteeism that is happening in the organization. So people are going to call out sick less, and they're going to come to work more. And so this is something to keep in mind, and just reducing something as simple as people coming to an agreement that we are not going to gossip, and everybody signs a document and you hold each other accountable. That is one way to actually start creating a culture that where you start to transition from that high level of toxicity to becoming a little bit more neutral, because people are not just gossiping and there's not a lot of backbiting that is going on in the organization. So from a coaching perspective, if that person manages a team, that is one way to deal with it. But first of all, the person has to realize that, if they are also engaging in that behavior, there has to be a level of honesty and engagement with you of what can they do to reduce these types of behaviors in their organization. And often that's not very easy, and a lot of people don't have that level of self-awareness. So as a coach, I would encourage all of you to do a little bit more research around narcissism, around toxic work culture, to better understand often what is happening, what is the organizational dynamic like in that environment, and how does that person fit into it? And then as a coach, how do you help that person better understand their own behaviors? What are they bringing into the table that's either helping, encouraging that that level of engagement? Because it takes two to tango, right? Even when you may be the victim of it, there are things you can learn as ways to disarm these types of people, ways to protect yourself. And the more that you're aware of it as a coach, you can better help your clientele, you help your clients to better engage others in a way where if they are not in a position to leave in 3 months or 6 months in a year, but they still feel like they can get their work done, but yet they have to be able to manage themselves. So that's really important, being able to look at self-management in that process as an individual. So when you are the person who is the recipient of toxic behavior, right? If people are bullying you, if you find yourself in a situation where, your manager actually is a narcissist or cluster B, so they have these more sociopathic, psychopathic behaviors, these are a few suggestions that I have for you to keep in mind that will help you to pretty much better deal with the situation that you're in. First, I want you to focus on your breath. Focus on yourself being present in your body. And one of the most empowering things that you can do for yourself is to be mindful of your own emotional state. And I know the coaches here are aware of this, and you probably use this in your practice. But for those who are not coaches, being mindful of what's happening in your body and how you're feeling will help you to better identify whatever types of triggers that may that things that person is doing that's getting under your skin, that's making you react. Because people who are very toxic, who are cluster B, who fit that cluster B profile, very often they will need your energy to react back to. So that's what I mean about it takes two to tango. There's a connection between the two. So when you learn certain techniques to downplay your interaction with them, that will help you. And so there are different techniques out there to be mindful of. For example, one of them, in the narcissistic language and discipline is called gray rock. And gray rock technique is basically not responding. The person says something, you just give yes or no answers. You don't show emotions. You keep your face completely, you just don't give them anything to react to. You say as much as you need to say and no more than that, but they don't get a reaction from you. And there are other things like, if you being able to step away and detach yourself. And that allows you to step almost as if you're stepping outside of yourself, and you're able to observe the interaction in the situation. And it allows you to be a bit more dispassionate and not get into this reactivity pattern that would put you in a place where you feel that you have to react, but you step away and you can actually observe it objectively. Now, what that does, it starts to limit your own self-talk. It starts to limit fear. It allows you to look at the situation for what it is exactly. And so it also allows you, again, to minimize your emotional reaction. You don't find yourself, you don't find yourself saying something that you don't mean, or feeling really bad after the interaction. And then, the wheels are spinning in your head. Well, I should have said this, or I shouldn't have said that. But it allows you to literally disassociate from the actual experience, look at it objectively, and then be able to respond accordingly, but not react. The third thing to keep in mind is make sure that you guard your heart and you guard your mind. And the reason why that is important is because the more you focus on this negative interaction pattern and you take it personally, the more it affects you. And I know it's it's easy to say, oh, just look on the brighter side, or don't take it so personally. But again, that level of detachment and being able to step away and not focus too much, especially when you find yourself being misdirected. So that when you say something, the person, they misdirect, like you're trying to get feedback on something, but then they actually misdirect you and they send you in another direction. And you're like, wait a minute, that's not what we were talking about. You find yourself being able to, again, step back, not allow yourself to get sucked into a lot of their own issues and that in negative interaction that they're actually looking for. Because that's usually it, right? There's a level of, they need your energy. They need to see how you respond. They need to see how they're impacting you. And that's pretty much how a lot of that behavior and those traits continue to manifest on another person, is because you're actually reacting and you're giving them something to work with. The more you limit your own reactivity, the less they can actually engage you. And very often they actually might go find somebody else because you're just not feeding into their toxicity. And lastly, learning to use certain techniques like rephrasing, reframing, and changing. If the person says something that's negative as a way to diminish you, deflecting it by telling yourself, yeah, this is really, you turn it into a positive. So you take a negative remark like, oh, your hair looks so much shorter than it normally does. But I like it. Like a comment like that to, no, I like my hair short. Something you can actually say to yourself, like, I keep it like this for a reason because it suits me. And so you don't let yourself getting sucked into that, oh, wow, like, is my hair really that short? I didn't realize, it made me look a certain way. Falling into those types of, going down that rabbit hole where you're just, saying things that only bring yourself down. And so instead, you use reframing techniques, you rephrase certain things for yourself. And these are things you do for yourself, right? The other person does not need to know that. So this is really focused. The biggest thing about this is focusing on yourself, focusing on how you can self-monitor, calibrate, and the things you can do to make sure that when you are engaging these individuals, that you're not reacting to them all the time and you're not giving them a lot to work with. And very often, the more you educate yourself about dealing with these types of individuals, you'll actually be in a better position to engage them in such a way that they won't hurt you as much. Now, the last thing is, if you are in a situation where you can actually, if you realize the culture really is toxic and your peers are toxic, your manager's toxic, the best thing you can do for yourself is to leave. Because you will never thrive in an organization like that at all. And especially if you choose not to participate in these types of behaviors. Sometimes people think that's the last resort, but sometimes it should be the first resort. When you realize this is not a place where I'm going to thrive, you look for another place. You look for another place of employment. But the caveat is making sure you do your due diligence before you jump into another organization or into another, working for another team or another boss that might, exhibit those same traits. So I'm going to pause here for a second and see what some of the thoughts that you all have shared. And also if you have any questions or anything that you'd like to add to this. So I see Milka says, thank you. So valuable, Milka, being an energy whisperer for your own energy. Thank you, Milka. Yeah, there are definitely ways to navigate how you navigate other people's energies. And Sharon says, you can't change the person, you can only change how you react with that person. Exactly. And so focusing on the things that you can control, right? And letting go of the things that you pretty much cannot. So, and just to wrap this up, the last thing I want to say is, this is when you go through these types of work cultures, they can actually change you. And I speak from experience because, as I mentioned earlier, I started my career where I had a boss, I had a manager who exhibited narcissism, and also when I left my last job, it was also the same thing. And I realized these experiences, they can create situations where you start doubting yourself a lot. It's because very often there's a lot of crazy making that's happening around you. Things don't make sense. You find yourself in, you're doing the things they're telling you to do, but you never can actually achieve the thing that, actually get to the goal, the end goal, the thing that you're striving for. It's never there. And so allowing yourself to first admit that it's not your fault. Very often, especially, I think when you're younger, you can get sucked into these types of environments. And as you mature and you get a bit older, you start to see them more clearly. When you walk into certain spaces, you can pick up on the energy, you can pick up on the type of people, their behavior, the way they engage each other and you're like, okay, this is perhaps not a good place for me. But very often when you're more green behind the ears and you're more junior, you may not have enough experience to understand the type of environment that you're in. And so first realizing that it's not your fault. And then the second thing is becoming much more self-aware. And for me, I think part of the reason I got into coaching was after having so many of these experiences, I started down this journey to better understand exactly, what exactly is happening. And then the more, as a coach, I've worked with close to 100 people in the last 5 years. And what you realize over and over again, this experience was not unique to me. Many, many, many people have had it. And as for all of you as coaches, you know this because you see it. You have clients who will bring many of these challenges to you, and you're helping often, to get more clarity. And the focus may often be on the person, but at the same time, looking at the culture and the organization that they're part of is very often essential to understanding, their own the process, their learning and their own development as a coachee. So gaining that level of self-awareness and being able to know your emotions, identify your feelings, pay attention to what's actually happening around you, because we have very strong minds. We all, as an educated person, we've all been taught to be great thinkers. We're very rational, but very often our minds can actually override our feelings, and our feelings can quickly tell us when something is wrong and when something is not. And sometimes our mind is a lot stronger than our gut feelings, and we can rationalize away what we may feel may not be right, but our mind tells us, okay, well, it's actually, it's not so bad. You can figure this out, or don't take it so personally, even though what was done or what was said to you was inexcusable or was completely unprofessional. And then lastly, brain fog is real. And brain fog is essentially when you've been in environments or situations where people are either lying all the time, they do a lot of misdirection, and they just don't tell the truth. And so after a while, you lose clarity, and you can often lose perspective because you find yourself in situations or environments where you're essentially in this constant state of confusion because what's happening around you doesn't make any sense. And so these are all things to keep in mind when you either are somebody who are in a toxic culture or you're working with a client and they're dealing with toxic environments. So this is a great frame of reference of first understanding the cultural, the dynamic in the organization, and looking for signs of some of the things I mentioned earlier, like gossipy cultures, cliquey cultures, poor communication, lack of transparency, a lot of manipulation. These are big signs that these are toxic environments. And so are there any questions or anything that we'd like to discuss among ourselves? We have time, in a few minutes. So I see that Sharon says, sometimes you wonder if it's you, but it's not. Exactly. And this is where, you can actually start getting very confused because you don't understand what's happening around you, because it doesn't make any sense. Okay, so Milka has asked me, can you say more about the work to do to increase skillfulness and being vigilant observer of yourself and challenging, as you noted, your own self-talk? Yeah, this is a great question. It's a great thing to ponder about self-work. So I'm going to take this from two different perspectives. So if we're to look first at the idea of developing your self-awareness, that is a process that very often it requires you to engage in a lot of self-reflection and engage in introspection, taking time, pausing, slowing things down, to better understand, where you are in your life, what decisions have you made, what are you going through, what matters to you, who's, perhaps where do you want to go in the future. So it's really taking stock as to your situation, so that you don't really just become a victim of circumstance, and you don't find yourself just things are happening to you all the time, because you're just not aware. You're not aware of your own experiences. As things are happening to you, you don't quite understand them because you're often busy just doing. You're busy getting things done. We all have like a million to-do lists, checklists, errands that we have to run. And so when you find yourself in that constant place of you're just doing, you can become less self-aware because you're not making the time that you, or taking the time that you need to be more present to your experience, and to ask yourself questions about why do you do the things that you do, and to do things like journaling, going for long walks, and really asking yourself and reflecting and being more present. So there are different ways to do that. Different spiritual practices that you can take, physical things like so things that anything that can help you to recenter and to reground back to your core of who you are. All of these things can help with self-awareness. If you are somebody who has never worked with a coach can actually help you through that process, because that's often one of the first steps in coaching is exploring self-awareness and being and returning more to yourself and understanding where you are right now. And so that's one aspect of that, being able to start cultivating that. You can work with someone, you could try to go it alone, and people sometimes make the mistake and they think, okay, I'm just going to get knowledge. Knowledge does not necessarily mean you're self-aware. You could listen to as many podcasts as you want, watch as many YouTube videos. If the connection with what the information you're getting is not connecting back to potential a level of awareness that will lead to behavioral change, the knowledge won't really do much. So you have all this information, but it hasn't actually become self-knowledge that will actually help you to change your behavior over time. Yeah, and then Lysandra asked me, makes a point. I am reflecting on the message of building self-awareness in conjunction with Dr. Nandi Sharif and Sylvia Heiss' messages about regarding the power of our beliefs. Yes, your beliefs are based on the things you tell yourself, right? The things that you're telling yourself becomes your belief, and your beliefs will become your actions, and your actions will become your behaviors, and your behaviors will become your habits. And it starts with the things you say to yourself all the way to the things that you start doing, they become your norm. So that's a really good point, Lysandra, that you're making that connection. Yeah. Yes, Mocha. So your body and self-awareness, very underrated. Something that, when you think about more somatic practices, they're looking at your physical self and how the emotions, energy that you have within yourself. And this is something that it helps you. The more you are aware of what's happening in your body, it tells you things that often your mind doesn't always tell you when you're paying attention. So I'll give you an example. I've noticed about myself when I am, one sign that I am feeling frazzled or a little disconnected or frustrated about something is I start to get clumsy. So I'll start dropping things. As a kid, I used to get into a lot of trouble at home because I used to break a lot of my mother's things, often by accident. I didn't know that until into my adulthood. I realized that it's when I feel disconnected or when I feel frustrated, I start to break things by accident. I'll walk into things. I'll stub my toe a few times, maybe in the same 48 hours and in the same place. And so that is often, I've learned that usually means something else. Something's going on in my head that I'm not paying attention to, and it's manifesting itself in my body with how I'm engaging and interacting with my environment. So that's a great point, Milka. So Yvonne says, excellent information to implement and live by. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, and then I get from Yvonne, stay in the present is exactly right. Guard your own heart. Take time to reflect and be aware of your own responses and learn from them. Yes. So I love the engagement. I love that you shared your thoughts. And I encourage you to share this with others because this is a topic, it can be triggering because sometimes for some people, they either already know it, but they may feel they don't really know what to do about it, or they don't want to think about it because there's a sense of helplessness or hopelessness because you feel like this is what I worked for all my life, or this is what I'm working towards. So I just have to learn to deal with it. And if you do have to stay in a place and it is a toxic environment, I would encourage you, get a coach or get someone who can help you to better navigate the situation if you do have to stay there, because you can, but it's the more aware you are of yourself and the more aware of what's happening around you, you can learn to navigate these places in a way almost like when these things are coming at you, it's almost like Teflon, and it's not sticking, it's just falling right off. And you don't absorb these behaviors, because the more you absorb them, the more they impact you. And the more you start to change, the core of yourself begins to change. And depending on how you engage in these types of environments. So yes, pay attention to the wisdom of your body and be mindful of that. So so thank you all for participating in this session. I really appreciate it. And unless there are any other questions, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and a wonderful week. And I'm looking forward to seeing all of you next Wednesday. Makeda will be presenting, and everything will be up on YouTube as well as on LinkedIn. And please invite others. And don't forget to like the video if you liked it. Put a comment in the comment section, because all of that just helps to get more views and to get more people on the channel as we continue to grow it and get more speakers to come and to join us in the future. So again, thank you for joining, and I look forward to continue engaging all of you. And if you haven't yet joined the LinkedIn group, we are CARE, as you see CARE, Coaches Against Racism and Exclusion. Join us on LinkedIn. That's where we often post when we're going to have our upcoming sessions or anything new that's happening with this group. So thank you all, and have a wonderful week. Take care.